Hi guys, here's Miss Wesley again, and we're going to talk about topic 2, which is all about finding sides. So we're now going to use what we learned in skill 1 about setting up trig ratios to help us find actual side lengths. So your essential question for today is how can you use trig ratios to find a missing side when given one side and an angle? So you have to be given those two pieces of information, one side and an angle, to be able to find any other sides that you want. So we're going to start with a pretty basic example here, and then we're going to work our way into word problems because, to be honest, you're not really going to see too many trig problems on your exam that are not in the context of a word problem. So we have our steps listed out here for you on the left. So these are the steps that I'm going to follow. So the first thing you always want to do is you always want to write out your SOHCAHTOA. So you have your ratios clearly for you so you don't forget that, oh, hey, I need to use one of these. So off the side, I'm going to write, so some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. And again, reminding myself that that is standing for sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that's the first thing we do. Second thing is it says solve for x to the nearest tenth. So here's our rounding direction. So again, there was that rounding refresher at the start of the packet. So we're going to find x. So in this scenario here, like it says in step 2, you always circle the given angle. So you don't circle a right angle because we always have to have a right angle, but you circle the other angle that's given to you. So meaning here, I'm going to circle the 69 degrees. So I'm standing where that 69-degree angle is, and from that angle's perspective, I have to go in and say, okay, where's my opposite side? So if I'm standing at 69, opposite of the 69 would give me x. So I'm going to put an O over there for opposite. Opposite of my right angle is always my hypotenuse, and the leftover piece that I have down here would be my A. Well, if I'm talking about finding x, I'm going to need to use this side because it's got an O in it, and I'm going to need to use this side over here because those are my only two sides with actual numbers in them. So meaning that since I only have O and I have H here, if I go back to my trig ratios, that's going to be a clue that I need to use sine. So I'm going to write it out, and I'm going to say, okay, sine of your angle. Well, my angle here is 69 degrees, so that's going to go in parentheses. Equals opposite over hypotenuse. Well, my opposite side was x. My hypotenuse was 17. So that's where we are at so far. So looking at our steps here, we circled the given angle. We labeled our sides, O, A, and H. Based on the sides, we figured out that we were going to use sine. And then we're to the point here where we've substituted. So the next thing we're always going to need to do is cross multiply. So we can put sine of 69 over 1. And if we cross multiply here, so x times 1 is just going to give me x. And then I have to do sine of 69 times 17. So I always put the number in front. So 17 times the sine of 69. So what you're going to do at this point is you are going to type this into your calculator. Type into calculator. So type the 17 like normal. To find the sine button, you're going to use, there's a trig button on the left-hand side of your calculator. So hit trig, and then it's going to pop up and you're going to see sine, cosine, tangent. So hit sine, type in your 69, and then hit enter. And when you do, you will get an answer of 15.8709, something like that. But the question here said round to the nearest tenth. So here's my 10th spot. I have to look next door. Okay, that 7 is going to bump the 8 up. So our final answer here is going to be 15.9. And that's the length of the missing side. There you go. All right, so let's take a look at an actual real life example here, like you might see on your Regents exam. And look at that. My letters did not group together. So give me one sec. Okay, now we're good to go. So it says here, a ladder is leaning against a wall. The ladder and the ground form an angle of 23 degrees. So between the ladder, which my ladder is right here. So between the ladder and the ground, here's the ground, we have our 23-degree angle. It says the base of the ladder is 14 feet from the wall, hence where the 14 is. Determine the length of the ladder to the nearest foot. So since I'm looking for the ladder, my X is going to go over here on the ladder. And the ground and a wall are always going to make a 90-degree angle. So if we look at our steps up above, it says the first thing we have to do is we have to circle our given angle. So we are given 23 degrees. So we're going to put ourselves there and say, okay, from this angle's perspective, my opposite side would be over here. It would be actually the wall. My hypotenuse is always across from the right angle, so there's my H. And then here's my adjacent side. So I have everything labeled, and I'm like, okay, which ratio should I use again? Oh yeah, that's right. Write out your SOHCAHTOA. Sine, cosine, and tangent. So looking at what we have here, I'm trying to find the H, so I need to make sure I use a formula that has an H in it. And I also only have the 14, so that's an A. So A and H is going to lead me to use cosine. So next, I set up my ratio. So I say, okay, cosine of my angle, which is 23, equals A over H. Well, A is 14, the H is X. So once I have this set up, I need to cross multiply. So I put cosine of 23 over 1. This time when we cross multiply, 14 times 1 is going to give me 14. X times cosine of 23. Write it as exactly as it sounds. X times cosine of 23. Remember, guys, our goal is to get x by itself. Well, if x is being multiplied by cosine, in order to get x by itself, I would have to do the opposite of multiplying by cosine, which is dividing by cosine. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So in doing so, cosine of 23 over cosine of 23 is going to cancel. So that means I'm now left on the right side with x, and x is going to equal 14 divided by cosine of 23. And again, type that in your calculator. So do 14, hit the divide button. Then again, to pull up cosine, hit your trig button on the left, pick cos, type in 23, hit enter, and you will be left with x equals 15.2090. This said round to the nearest foot, so meaning nearest whole number. So I look at the 15 and I say, okay, next to the 15 is a 2. That 2 is not going to bump the 15 up, so my final answer would just be 15. Remember, you don't have to put labels on it, like you don't have to say 15 feet. 15 is totally acceptable. All right. So at this point, we've seen two solving sides. One of them where we cross multiplied and you just typed it in. The second one, like we saw here, you had to do a little dividing. But let's flip over to the next page and we're going to look at two more examples and then you'll have time to practice. So example 3 here, it says the following question shows a student's work for solving for x. So that was their goal, was to find x. Find the missing side and explain what they should have done instead. So meaning that they probably made a mistake along the way here. So it wants us to find the missing side. So we're going to pretend like this work is not even here. So meaning that we know the first thing we would do is we'd circle our angle. From that angle's perspective, we're going to put our labels on. So opposite of the 37 is going to be my x. Opposite of the right angle is our hypotenuse. And then the leftover side here is our adjacent. So from there, we're going to set up our trig ratios. Sine, cosine, and tangent. So going back and looking at my picture, we're trying to find x, so I'm going to need to use O. I'm given h, so I'm going to need O and h, meaning we're going to need to use sine, which if we look over here, the student did use sine, so okay so far. So we have sine of our angle's 37 equals O over h, so x over 11. Now if we stop and say, okay, how does our work compare to their work? Well, if we look, they did sine of 37 equals 11 over x. Now ask yourself, is that correct? We did x over 11. And again, we did x over 11 because the ratio says opposite over hypotenuse. X was our opposite side, 11 was our hypotenuse. So their mistake here, if we take a second to jot it down, is the mistake is in the trig ratio. Okay. They put h over o instead of o over h. So they essentially got their sine ratio backwards. They did hypotenuse over opposite instead of opposite over hypotenuse. So now that we know that we have the correct setup over here, let's take a minute and just solve it. So sine of 37, put that over 1. Cross multiply, x times 1 is going to get me x. 11 times sine of 37, again, write that out. X is already by itself, so just go ahead and type in this right side into your calculator. And when we do, they didn't give us rounding directions here, we're going to end up with 6.619, we got 97. So if we stick with rounding to the nearest tenth, answer should be 6.6. Okay. Now remember, at any point in time, if I lose you or you're confused on something, please call myself or Miss Griffin over so we can explain it to you. We hate for you guys to continue on when you're lost, so please just call us over. We're going to get one last example here with example 4, and then, like I said, you'll have plenty of time to practice. Alright, so let's scroll down here and look at example 4, last one. This question says, if your distance from the foot of the tower is 20 meters, so we're standing 20 meters away from a tower. So the tower is clearly labeled here, so that means this distance is going to be 20. We're going to pretend that we're right over here. The angle of elevation is 40, so that's from the ground up, remember. So this angle right here is going to be 40 degrees. It says, if a wire was tied from the top of the tower to the ground where you are standing, how long would the wire be to the nearest tenth? So meaning the wire is this length here if we were to connect from the ground to the top of the tower. So we're going to let that be our x. So again, at this point, we say, okay, I know my angle, so our angle's 40, so we're going to stand where we are, right over here. From our perspective, the tower would be opposite of us, which we don't have and we really don't care about. Hypotenuse, again, the ground and the tower make a 90-degree angle, so the x is going to be our hypotenuse, and then the 20 is adjacent to us. That's our distance from the tower to where we currently are. So at this point, everything's labeled. I'm going to set up my ratios so I can figure out which one I should pick. Hopefully you're getting pretty good at this point. So based on our information, we're looking for the hypotenuse, so we need to have an h in our formula. We know the adjacent side, so a and h is going to lead me to pick cosine. So why don't you pause the video, take a second, set up your ratio, and then pause, or press play, when you have it all set, and we'll make sure that our ratios match. So hopefully your ratio looks like this. Cosine of 40 equals 20 over x, because again, 20 was our adjacent side, x was the hypotenuse. I'm going to put cosine of 40 over 1. It's time to cross multiply. So 20 times 1 is just 20. X times the cosine of 40. So again, write it like you see it. X times the cosine of 40. Our goal is to get x by itself. X is being multiplied by cosine, so meaning I have to do the opposite of that, which is to divide by cosine. Make sure you bring that 40 along. So at this point, the cosine over 40, cosine over 40 would cancel. You are going to type this into your calculator, and when we do, again, check your math along with me because I type stuff in wrong all the time. So if I type this in right, we should be looking at 20, come on pen, 20.1081, and it wants me to round to the nearest tenth, so meaning I need one decimal place. If I look next door, it's a 0, so my final answer here is going to be 20.1. And there you have it. You just learned how to find sides using trig ratios. So it's a pretty straightforward process, like I said, once you get the hang of it. So we know that you need to label with your O's, A's, and H's, write out your trig ratio so you can pick which one is best, set up your ratio. From there, you always cross multiply to find your variable. So if you have questions, call Miss Griffin or myself over. We'll help you out, and then take a look at the practice and work your way to CFU. See you next time.